Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning to our participants joining us from Germany, which I know a few of us are also joining us from. I'm Michael Zetinik. I'm the Deputy CEO of the German-Australian Chamber of Industry and Commerce, and I have the great pleasure of being the co-host of today's session together with my great colleague, Dr. Fiona Simon, CEO of the Australian Hydrogen Council. We both have a very special role in the bilateral relationship, and this is why we have been asked to co-chair this webinar today. We are the co-chairs of the German-Australian Hydrogen Sub-Working Group, which is the institute between both governments and with industry input, trying to overcome any hurdles that we identify in the bilateral hydrogen collaboration. As many of you know, there is already a very well established framework for bilateral hydrogen collaboration, and Franziska Teichmann will outline the German-Australian Hydrogen Accord, one of the key pillars of the bilateral collaboration, a bit further. So the main aim of today's event is really to give you an update about H2Global, one of the great initiatives from the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action in order to increase bilateral hydrogen collaboration, not just on the level between Australia, Germany and Australia, but also on with other partner countries, but it is absolutely open for Australian participants. And we want to give you insights into that, as well as the German-Australian Hydrogen Accord, and also have a special panel discussion for you organized on opportunities for Australian projects and collaboration opportunities between Australia and Germany. Can I hand over to my co-chair, Fiona? Over to you, please.
Thank you, Michael. So it's a pleasure to be here today. So I'm Fiona Simon. I'm the CEO of the AHC, and we're the industry body for the clean hydrogen industry in Australia. So I'm not sure, are there issues with seeing me right now? Because I feel like we're seeing Michael. Okay, not that Michael's not a delight to look at, but so we're really pleased to speak with you today about H2Global. I'm just going to quickly run over some housekeeping. So Sonia, if we could put that slide up, please. I think what I'm viewing is not, okay, there we go. So first of all, please do note the event's being recorded. We would prefer that you show your cameras, show yourself on camera so that we can all engage with you and see your lovely faces, but it would be great if you could please mute your microphones so we can try to keep the background noise to a minimum. We do have a chat function. We also, because we're in a normal Zoom meeting, we do have the opportunity for you to raise your hand at different times, and we can take questions that way. So please do use the chat function for questions, or the raise your hand function, and whichever of us is doing the moderating, we will jump back and forth between the two approaches. And you can use the reactions, emoticons and the like as well to interact with people. So feel free to do that, and it makes it a bit more fun as well. So again, welcome. I'm now going to hand over to Franziska Teichmann. Franziska is the Senior Manager at the German think tank Adelphi and the head of the German Secretariat for the Energy Cooperation with Australia. So Franziska is going to tell us about the Australia-Germany Hydrogen Accord. And over to you, Franziska.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Let me just share my presentation with you. I hope you can see that now. So hello, everybody. Welcome from my side to today's event. I'm really excited for it. Thanks, Fiona and Michael, for moderating today. And thanks, Timo Bollerhey, for your input, and also our panelists for contributing. Before we dive into H2Global, let me very briefly give you an overview of the Hydrogen Accord and more broadly the hydrogen cooperation between Australia and Germany. Thanks for introducing me, Fiona, already. As mentioned, I'm working at Adelphi. We're a German think tank working on all aspects of a sustainable future, including energy, climate change, biodiversity, etc. And Adelphi has been commissioned by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, BMWK for short, to support them with their energy cooperation with a couple of countries over the past years, and among them Australia, where I am leading the project. So let's dive into the Hydrogen Accord. The bilateral Hydrogen Accord is a declaration of intent between the governments of Australia and Germany, and it was signed in June last year. It has the goal to intensify the cooperation on low emissions technologies, specifically on hydrogen. It was signed between the Australian Department for Industry, Science, Energy and Resources, DISE for short, the German Federal Ministry for Education and Research, BMBF for short, and then the BMWK, as I already mentioned. And then the body of the accord are really 3 initiatives, and I've listed them on the slide here. So the first initiative is the German-Australian Hydrogen Innovation and Technology Incubator, which is abbreviated to HyGate. And this is a funding round to support pilot and demonstration projects along the hydrogen supply chain. The funding round opened in March and it's still running until the 3rd of May. And it is co-funded by the Australian government with 50 million Australian dollars and the German government with 50 million euros. There was a really well-received information session by ARENA on it in March, and you can find more information on ARENA's website on it. The second initiative of the Accord is about facilitating industry-to-industry cooperation in hydrogen hubs in Australia. There was no dedicated funding for this initiative, but both governments have committed significant budget towards supporting hydrogen projects. The Australian government has the funding for Australian hydrogen hubs, very notably, and the German government established the German funding guideline for international green hydrogen projects that was also open to Australian projects. We held an information session on that, similar to today's, back in October last year, and I'm sure some of you might have attended that. Then lastly, the third initiative of the Accord is aiming at the facilitation of trade of hydrogen and derivatives between Australia and Germany, including through the German import platform H2Global. And that's why we're here today. H2Global is really a fantastic opportunity for early movers and for help in building up that hydrogen value chain. Next slide. As mentioned, the Hydrogen Accord is an initiative of 3 ministries, DISE, and on the German side, BMBF and BMWK. And between them, they also have a longer standing formalized cooperation. And I wanted to briefly mention the Australia-Germany Energy Partnership, which is between DISE and BMWK. The Energy Partnership is the umbrella which comprises the Energy Working Group, which is the high-level steering group of DISE and BMWK that usually meets once a year. And we also have 2 sub-working groups within that energy partnership. And it was already mentioned, we have the sub-working group on hydrogen that Michael and Fiona are heading. Apart from hydrogen, which is obviously a very big part of the cooperation, there's also a sub-working group on energy efficiency. And then we have the German Secretariat, which I'm heading, which is supporting all of the activities and meetings. And then my last slide, to give you an overview of the broad bilateral hydrogen cooperation network in particular, I briefly wanted to show you this slide. So there are many bilateral initiatives and activities in the hydrogen space, and this slide lists the main ones. In the middle, you have the Hydrogen Accord by the 3 ministries with the 3 initiatives. And then left to it is the Joint Science and Technology Meeting, which is the governmental exchange framework between DISE and the BMBF, the research ministry, where specifically hydrogen-related research topics are discussed. Then on top of the box with the Hydrogen Accord, we have the Energy Partnership. I just outlined that between DISE and BMWK. And then to the right of the Accord, which I haven't mentioned, is High Supply, which is the bilateral project funded by the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, DFAT, and then again DISE and BMBF. And it's a project to investigate an Australian-German hydrogen supply chain. It's led on the Australian side by the University of New South Wales, and then on the German side by the Federation of German Industry, BDI, and the National Academy of Science and Engineering. They have a really broad network of research and industry project partners in there, and I'm really excited that we have Jill Thesen from the BDI on our panel, and she will talk a little bit about the project later on. And then below High Supply, we also have the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, Austrade for short, who are obviously also working very intensely on advancing the hydrogen collaboration. And we have David Urry also on our panel today. And then lastly, the German-Australian Chamber of Industry and Commerce has also launched the German-Australian Hydrogen Alliance as a business platform for the bilateral cooperation. All right, that was my short and hopefully informative introduction, and I hand back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Franziska. I think that was really useful to have an overview of the really comprehensive bilateral hydrogen collaboration framework. Clearly there is a lot of interest, as we can see in today's meeting, with already 77 participants joining us already now, which is absolutely great. And really now we are coming to the most interesting part, I think, of the session, to hear directly from Timo Bollerhey. Timo is the executive director of Hint.co and the managing partner of the H2Global Advisory. He has more than 20 years of experience in investment and financial markets, and is one of the architects of H2Global. Before I hand over, just a quick reminder, we will have time for some Q&A, so definitely please put in the questions either in the chat or raise your hand after Timo's presentation. And of course, following his presentation and the Q&A part, we will also have the great panel discussion with industry and experts from Australia and Germany. Timo, can I hand over to you, please?
Absolutely. Very good morning or good afternoon to everybody. It's like seeing old friends here. You know, I see David. I'm really happy to see Andrew Edge also, because Andrew, he was sort of right there from the beginning when we started H2Global 2 years in Brazil during the lockdown of COVID. We had a little bit of time during the weekends to think, what would we do if somebody would ask us, how would you sort of manage the hydrogen uptake if the government would provide you with sufficient funding? And that's when we started creating H2Global out of a first idea. And we're really happy and still surprised to see where we got today, that we're really starting to implement now H2Global with the first 900 million. Thanks, Michael, for the introduction to myself. I'm trying to share my screen. I hope it works, because I had some issues this morning with my computer. Can you see my screen here?
Yeah, it works really well. Thanks, Timo. Maybe you can go into presentation mode and then, yeah, perfect.
Very good. Maybe let me start a little bit with a framing and the background of H2Global about how the mechanism works, and then we can maybe also dive deep into the Australian interaction. There's a lots of things happening between, let's say, H2Global and Australia. Just last week, we had also Ambassador Green here with us in Hamburg in our offices to see how we can collaborate together. We got lots of exchange also with some of your large industry players, with Andrew Forrest and its team. So lots of things are happening also on a political scale. We know that the discussions between the former Chancellor Merkel last year and your president. So there's a lots of things happening. I'm also very much looking forward to come to Australia in a couple of weeks' time, being part of the delegation and also joining the upcoming conference in Adelaide. So there's lots of things happening. But before we deep dive into sort of opportunities for Australia, let me just explain the mechanism a little bit, also do a little bit of expectation management right from the beginning. We received 900 million for the first round of auctions under H2Global. If I look at all the interest that we receive from all over the world, with all the, I don't know, hundreds of projects that are looking at H2Global at the moment, I'm always trying to make it very clear. Listen, guy, 900 million is a lot of money, but if you divide it through 10 years, 3 different products, I will explain that later, this won't be sort of serving all the projects that might look into AHK Global now with this first round of auctions, but we want to start somewhere, and I think it's a very good start what we're doing now. Maybe just to give you a little bit of a background, what is H2 Global all about? Michael mentioned I've got a financial background, so I always looked at things from a, let's say, project finance point of view. And when I looked at the current market situation where we have this huge cost of difference between production costs of green hydrogen and its derivatives and the prices that you can receive in the market, which is more or less equivalent to gray hydrogen or gray PTX products, there's this huge cost of difference at the moment. On top, we have, let's say, decreasing or potentially decreasing production costs due to the reduction of the cost for the electrolyzers. And on top, we have a huge uncertainty in regards to the regulatory environment. Nobody knows what the regulatory environment will look like in the next couple of years, CO2 pricing, border taxing, quotas that will be implemented. So there's huge uncertainty. However, the politicians and the industry, they say, listen, if we want to achieve the goals 2030, 2050 in regards to decarbonization, we cannot wait. We need to start investing now. In Germany, especially, or in Europe, especially since 2 months since the war in the Ukraine, the whole aspect of diversifying away from existing, let's say, dependency in regards to energy supply has made a huge sort of step forward that we need to start investing now to diversify energy supply in Europe, in Germany. And that's exactly where AHK Global comes in, because we want to provide that investment case now, today, in providing the investment certainty that projects can really start investing now and getting out of, let's say, that stage of signing MOUs, but really into going into investment decisions. Very important of the AHK Global model is that we have a clearly defined system in regards to the volumes that are being provided and also in regards to the tenors. We didn't want to set up, let's say, a subsidy scheme that's a bottomless pitch and will, continue for forever, like we've seen this many times with other schemes. In this case, for example, we provide 10-year funding or 10-year offtake agreements. 900 million for the first round of auctions are being provided, in this case, by BMW UK. So that makes it a very well steerable product or concept and mechanism for the government, for the provider of the funds, in order to be always sort of ahead of the game. The core element of H2 Global is what we call HINCO, the Hydrogen Intermediary Company. And I always refer to HINCO as being the most stupid company in Germany at this time, because HINCO is an intermediary between the supply and the sales side of and the demand side of hydrogen and derivatives. So HINCO really purchases hydrogen and derivatives at a relatively high price at this point in time and sells it much cheaper into the German, into the European market. So HINCO is immediately more or less bankrupt. And in order that this doesn't happen, that's when I can call to Berlin and say, listen, guys, I need some of that 900 million that you provided to HINCO to compensate for the cost of difference between the supply price that HINCO pays and the sales price that it receives from selling it into the markets. On top, HINCO is only an instrument. We're not planning to become a new midstreamer here for the medium and long term. It's really an instrument, and the aim of HINCO that after that 10-year period, we will take off the signs of HINCO at the wall in Hamburg and in Leipzig, and hopefully we will no longer be needed and the market will do its own. Very important is that we have a very market-related scheme here. So we have what we call the twin auction model that we provide here in the model. And we look at this, we have HINCO really as sort of that intermediary, providing long-term offtake agreements on the supply side. So HINCO is really the contractual partner here in regards to the supply side. What we do, we provide via a competition-based procurement process. We always refer to it as an auction. A global auction for these 900 million euros at this point in time, which means production outside of the EU for an import of their products into Germany, into the EU. And as normal for an auction, we try to achieve the lowest possible price that is achievable in the market by having this global competition-based auction. By that, we really ensure that we get a price signal, because nobody really knows what is actually the real market price now. If somebody would really provide 10-year offtake agreements here, can really somebody lock in at this time and at this time for 10 years, and what will be the price? And HINCO provides 10-year offtake agreements, as I said, and is government backed. And that makes it a very, let's say, viable offtake agreement that is bankable. So that makes sort of that investment case that industries, but also investors can start investing now based on the offtake agreements. We call them the HPAs, the hydrogen purchase agreements that HINCO provides for a period of 10 years. On the sales side of HINCO does the same, also an auction. Here, obviously, the highest bidder will get the strike. That ensures that the cost of difference that the German taxpayer, in this case, needs to compensate for is as minimal as possible. But I said on the supply side, we have 10-year offtake agreements providing that investment certainty. But on the sales side, we only provide short-term contracts, 1 year most likely. And we do that for a very specific reason. If we look at this graph, this potentially is just a graphical illustration of what the price developments could look like. But what we do with that horizontal line on top, this is the 10-year offtake agreement at a fixed price that HINCO enters into, providing the investment certainty. The green lines just symbolize the potential development of the pricing that HINCO can achieve for those products when it on-sells it into the European market. In the beginning, as I said, there's this tremendous price gap that needs to be compensated for by the subsidy scheme H2Global. But we assume that in the next couple of years, the regulatory environment will change significantly, which will have a huge impact in regards to the demand for green derivatives and green hydrogen. There will be limited supply, at least in the medium term, so the prices for those products should rise. And in order to allow HINCO to benefit from that increase in pricing that it potentially can achieve in the markets, that's why we have this diversion in tenors and only have short-term contracts on the sales side of HINCO. And that makes it a very efficient model for the taxpayer, for the German government, because it obviously only needs to compensate for the actual upcoming cost of difference that will occur. And that makes it also quite a different, or is a significant difference to existing normal, let's say, traditional CapEx in subsidy schemes. In this case, in a CapEx scheme, for example, the 900 million would have been provided right from the beginning, and the 900 million would have been spent in total. Here we say 900 million is the maximum that the German taxpayer needs to pay, but we assume that it will be much less because we assume that the cost of difference will decrease over that 10-year offtake agreement. Very important also when we look into the discussion now with Australia. H2Global is like a modular system. We call it the window logic. Here, the first window, we call it the global window. BMW has provided 900 million euros for purchasing globally of 3 products. In this case, it's ammonia, methanol, and e-kerosene that will be purchased for these 900 million. And it's also the provider of the funds, in this case BMW, that dedicates specifically what the funds are being used for, what products, from which geographies, and what are also the, let's say, the criteria that need to be implemented, whether it's sustainability criteria or any other criteria that the BMW in this case wants to focus on. However, we can add further windows like a modular system here. This could be another window by BMW, maybe with a different geography, for example, but it could also be a European window, for example, where we already have the discussions with the European Commission at the moment. And it's clearly stated also in the coalition agreement of the German government to Europeanize H2Global. This could be that we have production and offtake within Europe, but it could also be global windows or geographical windows under H2Global to import into Europe. Very important is also the fact that we have discussions since last year, since the discussions between Premier Morrison and Chancellor Merkel, to set up maybe an Australian dedicated window, where we are currently looking into opportunities to provide co-funding between the Australian government and the German government to set up a specific Australia window, which would mean export from Australia only, focused on Australia, importing into Europe, into Germany. There are some WTO and GATT implications to that, so we're just trying to see how we can best sort of streamline things here, that we make this work under the H2Global model, but these are ongoing discussions that we have at the moment. But it makes H2Global a very, let's say, flexible instrument and really scalable instrument. As I said, the 900 million are hopefully only the beginning. We have strong signals that we will receive further funding from the German government, but maybe also when we look into Europe, into the discussions that are ongoing now, then if the Europeanization will take place, we'll most likely see more and significantly more funding coming up. Maybe a last slide before we go into the Q&A is the way we structured the implementation of H2Global. When I designed HINTCO at first, I thought HINTCO would become a state-owned entity, but the German government made it very clear right from the beginning, the government does not trade with energy. Since 4 weeks or 6 weeks, this is a little bit slightly different given due to the Ukrainian crisis. But however, that was a very clear statement by the German government. The government said, we are happy to compensate for the cost of difference, but the scheme itself must be set up, run, and also financed by the industry itself. And that's why we created the H2Global Foundation. We are already standing at around 34 funding members, which are alongside the entire value chain of the hydrogen economy. It's not only German companies, it's European companies. We're also hoping to see Australian companies joining soon. It's Canadian companies, American companies that are currently joining. And it's a very, let's say, innovative format of a PPP, a collaboration between the government and the private sector, because we all have the same goal. We want to create that hydrogen economy, that hydrogen market, in order for the companies also then be able to compete against each other. But we first need the market before we can really sort of start doing the investments and start doing the competition. Below that foundation, we've got the HINTCO as a company owned by the foundation, but there's absolute firewall between the actual funders. I don't know, I'm just bringing one name, that Siemens, for example, cannot interfere in any case with HINTCO in regards to the upcoming auctions for compliance reasons. Maybe just a little bit of background where we stand in the process. We received the 900 million towards the end of last year. We're just now in the preparation phase for the first auction. I assume that HINTCO will announce also the exact details of the auctions within the next 2 to 3 months. This will be announced via all the, let's say, usual platforms. And then we will start most likely the format of a competitive dialogue to start the first round of auctions with these first 900 million for these 3 products: ammonia, methanol, and e-kerosene. The government has specifically chosen these 3 products because pure hydrogen is a little bit of a challenge at the moment in regards to logistics. So that's why the government focuses on the derivatives first, and potentially with an outlook over the next couple of auctions that might be coming up, we might also be looking into trading pure hydrogen. Maybe that's so much from my side, and I'm happy for any questions that might have arrived.
Great, thanks so much, Timo. We have had some questions, so I will jump around a bit between them, and please, people do keep sending through your questions, and feel free to raise your hands as well. So it was great, Timo. Thank you so much for taking us through where things are at. I know I've got quite a few questions of my own as well. But if I start with what we've been asked at the moment, one of the questions is, what's the delivery point for the hydrogen plays? And I assume by that we mean the point of import.
Yeah, very good question. So it's a hint, or the H2Global mechanism has also been accorded with the European Commission and notified. And in the notification, it has been agreed that there will be a delivery triangle between the northern part of Germany down to the Belgian coast, and Duisburg as sort of a middle part in Germany. That's sort of a triangle, a delivery triangle for the products that need to be delivered towards Europe. So it makes it very clear it's not only German off-takers that come into play here, it's also European off-takers. And 85% of the offtake and the consumption of hydrogen and these derivatives takes place within that triangle. And I think 95% of the logistical facilities being able to handle these products and the logisticals that are also based within that triangle.
And I imagine that having it spread over a number of places also sort of is opening up those options for those other windows, those other European countries as well.
Exactly. As I said, we have the window logic. Also, once we might enter into, let's say, an inner European model, things will look different. But for this first round of auctions, it's this dedicated triangle between Belgium, Northern Germany, and Middle Germany.
Thank you. Sabine, did that answer your question?
Thank you, Fiona. Yeah, it does. And then the follow-on question really is, if we have this delivery triangle, do we have then everything in that triangle connected via a pipeline system, or how is that being connected?
It's not yet connected. I mean, that's one of the things we need to, you know, the hydrogen backbone is a big discussion at the moment. There is, when we go into pipeline connections, there are connections already, especially if we look in Holland and Belgium. But however, for these three products, we do not necessarily need pipelines at this point in time. There are other modes of transport and shipment. That's why we also deliberately looked at these products at first and not at pure hydrogen.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
Got another question here. What's currently planned on the question of certification, Timo? So the standards that hydrogen or the hydrogen derivatives will need to fulfill. Are you able to expand on that a bit, please?
That is a very good question, because certification and standardization is a very big issue. It's one of the huge uncertainties that we try to address with the H2Global model. Also for HINTCO, there's a huge risk that HINTCO takes, and specifically and intendedly takes, because nobody knows what is sort of the current standards, what is the current certification scheme. I always make jokes, you know, the delegated act for RED 2 in Europe is always 2 weeks away. And that's the situation since, I don't know, 1 year now. So we need to take out that uncertainty for the market, and HINTCO takes sort of that risk. But obviously HINTCO also has got the huge ambition that whatever we agree upon now that we define as green will also be defined as green, I don't know, 5 years, 8 years down the line, because otherwise HINTCO wouldn't be able to, you know, achieve a green premium for the product it's on selling. So what we're doing, or what the government is doing, BMW UK, we will set, if we like it or not, we will set a certain standard during with the first auction that we enter into, with a clear definition on the green attribute that we will imply on the contracts here. So this is one of the things where we at one stage won't be able to wait for any, let's say, signals out of Brussels. If the delegated act is out by then, perfect. If not, we just need to make our own assumptions and enter into sort of standards that we will define, obviously based always on what we ever assume will be upcoming standards on a European, on a global level.
While we're on this topic, I might open it up a bit more explicitly. Does anyone have a question just based on what Timo's just said, or during a building on that question of certification? If anything occurs to you, jump in. I've got another one here about, and I think everyone will be wondering about, how does Australia participate in the auctions? To what degree do you see transport costs being the decisive element? But then also, we've got these elements of a potential Australian window. So how do we see that unfolding relative to that first round of auctions? Are you able to expand on that a bit more? Yeah, sorry, I'll stop there.
It's really one of the questions that we ask ourselves as well, or the market and also government ask itself, you know, what is really the case now when we look into having a global auction? Will you know, countries like Australia, but also, I don't know, Chile, South Africa, Namibia, are they competitive compared to, I don't know, North Africa, to the Middle East? Because transport obviously is a different element here. This is one also of testing the waters, I think, through models like H2Global. That's why we also do not look at, let's say, book and claim approaches, but really have a physical delivery of the molecules from the country of production towards Europe, towards Germany. I could assume, but this is really something that we need to see and will be one of the outcomes out of the auctions. I assume that we will have many different geographies sort of competing in this first round, and then we will see, is it really realistic that despite the long transport routes that from Australia, for example, would need to take place, that it's still competitive, because the local competitive advantages in regards to production costs for green energy are just so great and so outstanding that it compensates for the, let's say, disadvantage of the, let's say, further away geography from a European perspective. We will see this. And then I think in further rounds, this could be addressed also by sort of having regional or specific regional auctions where you say, okay, I don't know, I don't want to be dependent only on, I'm just saying now, the Middle East, in case Middle East would be competitive, more competitive than other regions here. I want to, you know, diversify into, I don't know, Latin America, into Australia, setting up Australia only windows, for example, to compensate for that also in regards to diversification. This is like the instrument of H2Global can be utilized going forward.
It does sound as though it is about establishing that initial baseline price to then determine. Look, I'm casting my own logic on it, which maybe is not correct, but then potentially to help then determine what flexibility there are in the windows to value those things which are not economic. So, I mean, obviously, with the situation in Europe with Russia and the Ukraine, you know, there's that need to value energy security, you know, that everyone is so thoroughly aware of. And to what degree then does that diversification, that portfolio approach that values Australia despite the distance, be the thing that makes that Australian auction, the window, something which then gets sort of reprioritized? Do you see that being the order of things, or do you see some of the windows happening sort of around the same time as that initial, the initial auction?
I mean, the Australian window has already been in discussion for a while now, so I think this is more or less going in parallel. Yeah. This is also independently from the outcome of that first auction, I would say. So this goes in parallel, but in principle, yes, exactly. We are all quite curious to see what's the outcome of the first auction, and then it's up to the government to you know, take their own considerations. What does it mean in regards to, you know, the further logic of how to implement or how to use and utilize the instrument H2Global? What we can always offer the government, also the European Commission, this is extremely flexible in the way you can use it, and you can, you know, try to target different targets and approaches here. Diversification, focus on pricing, focus on products, geographies. It's up to the governments or the provider of the funds to put its own emphasis on wherever they want to put them.
Thank you. Another question, actually, I'll jump around a bit. So is there a target quantity for the first auction?
No, because we've got a little bit of an interesting situation here. We are sealed by the 900 million in regards to the maximum contracts that HINTCO can enter into. My first approach was, let's use this 900 million for the expected cost of difference, and then we get an additional guarantee by the government in case the 900 million are being exceeded. If we wouldn't have a guarantee, then HINTCO wouldn't be bankable. From a budgetarian point of view, this is very, let's say, a lengthy project and a difficult process to implement such a guarantee scheme. That's why we are currently sealed at this 900 million. So what we're actually auctioning here is, for this 900 million, whoever can provide the largest amount of molecules will get sort of the strike here, which you can, you know, obviously also turn into pricing factor then at the end of the day.
Thank you. There's another one here, and it's about understanding this question. Oh, actually, I'll just read the question. How much European/German and Australian investment/content need to be included in a project which participates in the auction? Is there an ideal mix, or can a non-European Australian mix bid just because its plant is located in Australia?
If we look into an Australian window, for example, I think from WTO perspective, it would be necessary. We cannot sort of drill this down and say it has to be Australia only or German industries only or German technology only. It has to be open, also from a state aid point of view. But obviously there's the huge hope by the German government, for example, that European industries will play an important role here, also for the first auction. And at the moment, the European industry is still sort of leading or leaders in the technology at the moment in regards to electrolysis, for example. And there's huge expectations, obviously, but from a WTO and a state aid point of view, it has to be open for non-European, non-Australian consortia and bidders to take place here.
Thank you. We'd certainly understood when H2Global was first announced that there would be a reasonable expectation of German technology playing a role. So I imagine that's still.
But yeah, there's the expectation, but it's agnostics. Otherwise, we would be in dire straits, and we would be sort of on sued on at the commission. Yes. So it's open for everybody. We hope that European industries will play, that they have a good positioning, let me put it this way, to be in the forefront here. We'll see.
We've got time. I'm going to go for one more question. I hope that's okay, organisers. So about infrastructure. So to transport the amounts of hydrogen derivatives into Germany, the various facilities, ships, import terminals, how is HINTCO thinking about, if at all, the development of the infrastructure? So what are your views on the challenges and the timeline of building that infrastructure up and how that relates to the deals that are being done through the HINTCO, through H2Global mechanism?
I mean, as I said, in the first place, for these three derivatives, the infrastructure is in place. That was also one of our big concerns. Yeah. A, do we have off-takers for the products that we purchase here? And B, is there infrastructure in place to handle, I don't know, ammonia or methanol, for example? That is the case, at least also specifically for the volumes that we're looking at here now. However, we need to think this in parallel, and that's also when we look in the discussions on a European basis, for example, with the hydrogen accelerator, where H2Global most likely will play a vital role here, that we need to think, things in parallel, that the infrastructure needs to be in place also if we want to reach the scales. I mean, just look, for example, at the Repower EU initiative that was launched in March, last March. I mean, the amount or the quantities that they want to install in the next until 2030 is 50 times the NEOM project in the Middle East at the moment, 50 times. And that's already a €5 billion or dollar investment. So the volumes are extremely high, the ambitions are extremely high, and we need the infrastructure. It's the hydrogen backbone that needs to be implemented. We need the facilities in regards to pipelines, but we also need the port facilities, all that. There's lots of things happening in Germany, for example, with the Brunsbüttel being sort of shorted now, that probably in 2 to 3 years, we'll have a new terminal there. So things are happening, but you need to think in parallel. Otherwise, we have the supply, but we cannot handle.
Thank you, Timo. Michael, did you say I'm okay to do another question, or do you think we've come to time now?
I think you can go one more. It's, I think, very fascinating to hear Timo's direct responses to the questions from the participant. So please, Fiona.
I'm going to maybe make James Hamilton's life a little bit difficult, but I've got a question here of how does HINTCO benchmark pricing across the hydrogen derivatives? Could you please expand on the most molecules basis? James, I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but were we talking about also just the volumes of each of the three? If I can throw to you, James, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. Just really expanding on how that commercial benchmarking is activated. Timo talked about the commodity that could supply the most molecules. It's not particularly clear to me. If you have a price for ammonia, you have a price for methanol, you have a price for e-kerosene, like how you decide to prioritize one over the other. It's
maybe I can correct. Maybe it was a bit sort of not clearly the point not made very clear from my side. We will within these three categories, within these three products, we probably, or the government made it very clear in its support letter, that we divide sort of the 900 million by 3. So 300 million are being available for these three different products. And then within these product categories, sort of the most molecules, or the consortia and the project providing the most molecules will get the prize. I think in general, the way also the tender will work, it's like a filter. The first filter is project readiness, because what I haven't mentioned yet, the aim is quite ambitious. The funds are being made available between the end of 24 until 33. So first delivery, well, there will be a wrap-up period, but first delivery of a molecule will be taking place, or needs to be taking place towards the end of 24. So project readiness is a very crucial aspect. The second aspect is all the, let's say, attributes and criteria that are being implemented, whether it's sustainability or others, that needs to be ticked. If these criteria have been achieved, then it's the price at the end of the day, or in this case, sort of the volume that will determine who will get the strike. That is the way the auction process will actually work at the end of the day.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Timo. If people do have further questions, what's your recommendation about how we can get those answered? Is it good for them to come to Michael and I, or do you have a preference about how we can sort of unpack any further questions that people have?
I would say maybe best would be if you could you know, put them together, that we don't get too many questions at one time. There will also be a market consultation by BMWK coming up, I think in around 6 to 8 weeks, where BMWK will invite, you know, every interested industry player to join that market consultation, because at the end of the day, HINTCO is only conducting whatever has been defined by BMWK, because we're not we don't want to play any industry politics. I always go back to BMWK. It's your decision. I'm not deciding what is green, what is not green. It's your decision. You need to dictate me whatever you want to do with that instrument, and we try to implement it at our best effort.
Great. Well, no doubt there will be further questions, but I think between Francisca and AHK and me, we can find ways to make sure that we handle those questions efficiently. And we certainly look forward to seeing you in Adelaide in a month or so. So thank you. I will now hand back over to Michael for the next part of our session. Thanks again, Timo.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much, Fiona, and thank you, Timo, for really those very insightful comments, answers, and of course your presentation as well. We are building on those very insightful points. We're really coming now into a panel discussion on opportunities for Australian projects and for bilateral collaboration, and I'm really delighted to have some wonderful representatives of bilateral opportunities and projects here with us today and in this exciting panel. Can I introduce them? First of all, Jill Thesen is representing the Federation of German Industries, BDI, and is one of the managers of the German hydrogen supply chain project HySupply. She has been closely working on the hydrogen cooperation between Australia and Germany since 2019, when a high-level delegation trip to Australia was organized, and I understand, Jill, you're also planning to visit Australia soon, so it is definitely great to have you on the panel. We have Gary Whitley here with us as well, is Director for Business Development and Sales at Linde Engineering. He is based in Perth normally, but I understand currently in Europe. Linde, I think, is familiar to almost everyone here or today in the discussion, but of course is a very large chemical company offering technologies across the whole hydrogen supply chain, and with a really remarkable track record in handling gas supplies, also other than hydrogen. And we have David Uri here with us. David is the Berlin-based Austrian expert for hydrogen collaboration with Germany. I should mention that, of course, the Australian government is currently in caretaker mode ahead of the Australian election on 21st of May. So Austra's work is also impacted to a small degree by that, but definitely great to have you on the panel, David, and we are looking forward to hearing also from you. You probably have seen then on the invitation that we were also expecting Andrew Dixon from H2 Global, the company behind the Asian Renewable Energy Hub, with us. Unfortunately, Andrew today had to withdraw his participation due to a urgent family matter, and so unfortunately can't be with us today. But we are delighted to have Jill, Gary, and David, of course, with us. And actually, I want to start with a question for all three of you. H2Global, of course, is an opportunity for fairly advanced projects globally. What do you think is the opportunity for Australian projects within H2Global and similar import platforms based on your everyday contacts with industry players? Jill, can I start with you, please?
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks also for having me on this panel today. So when, as you said, H2Global is very well suited for fairly advanced projects, and I think Australia is very well suited in that case. Back then, when, as you mentioned earlier, when we went to Australia in 2019, Australia was already engaging in the field of hydrogen on many different levels. So within those 2.5 years, they truly managed to present and establish themselves as they referred to, willing, ready, and able to deliver renewable hydrogen, which I think is a great advantage compared to other countries. And I think the other advantage for Australia to compete in auctions for H2Global, or rather use H2Global to kickstart the supply chain, is also their experience in exporting energy and their knowledge on how to do that on a large scale. So I think they have a good chance.
Yeah, no, I think indeed those are really strong points for Australia's participation in H2Global and in the auction model. Gary, what is your impression coming from such a key industry company?
Yeah, I guess from our side, yeah, being a technology company, but also build own operating gas and hydrogen plants globally, it's key for us to have these funding schemes in place to get these projects underway. It's a stepping stone, and it's an area where we definitely need to assist the projects getting off the ground, and not just small demo plants or research facilities. We're really focusing on the next stage and building up for commercial kind of big mega scale stage projects.
Indeed, this is really the big stepping stone where H2Global will really be instrumental in really helping the scale up into full industrial size green hydrogen production. David, how is your insights into the bilateral opportunities through H2Global specifically?
Yeah, I can just support everything that Jill and Gary have said so far. I think what makes this really interesting for Australian companies, in addition, is that in the past, they've had very much a focus around the Asia Pacific and specific markets like Japan or Korea. And H2Global is just yet another argument for Australian energy exporters to look at the European markets, and specifically to engage with countries like Germany, who will be big energy importers. And this is just yet another piece that will make Europe as a market more interesting and puts it on the radar.
Thank you, David. And yes, I think this is a very widely shared view that really this is a great opportunity to build on Australia's expertise in energy export and really expand it into green hydrogen space and into the new European market in terms of those export opportunities. And this is, of course, where we from the German Australian Chambers, through our initiatives like the German Australian Hydrogen Alliance, also try to support the collaboration. Gary, can I ask you specifically more in terms of H2Global, of course, is one quite specific instrument for collaboration and for global market ramp up. What is the H2Global advantage or disadvantage compared with other instruments to support the market wrap up? For example, direct project grants from your perspective.
Yeah, I think H2Global really covers the key areas, the key industries moving forward. So like the green products with hydrogen, ammonia, methanol, etc. So it's not moving into other sectors. It's really focusing on that core industry and targeting that market, which I think is key moving forward. It's the scaling up of the project. So like we said earlier, that it's focusing on that next stage and moving to that next level of size of plant and demand of product up into Europe. And it's really filling the gap in between the pricing sector to try and assist these projects to get off the ground and get them moving. As far as disadvantages go, I don't really have a response to that one. I'm not that across the whole scheme or from that side of things, but I guess it was more of a question, and it relates a bit to what James Hamilton said earlier, which was around the distribution of those, and Timo or Jill might be able to assist me here, but it was really around that funding body distribution, and I saw that there was global, regional and country, and it was kind of what percentage, how would that be distributed across those sectors, and how will that assist moving forward, or what that percentage is for those different regions.
Timo, is that something you want to immediately respond to?
Yeah, maybe it's just, as I said, these we will most likely, at least in the draft or in the support letter that we received, or HINCO received by BMW UK, it's mentioned that the 900 million should be distributed sort of proportionally, 300 million for each of the products. And for each of the products, it will be a global auction. I think it's important because the funds, that 900 million that are being made available, they're based or coming from the COVID-19 stimulus package, from the 2 billion that are being provided for the imports ex-EU into Europe. That's why this first auction is sort of ex-EU into importation into Europe, but it's a global auction. So it really anybody outside of the EU can participate here, and 300 million for each of these different products.
Okay, great, thank you.
No, thank you, Timo, and thank you, Gary. And indeed, I think that is without doubt a specific opportunity for Australia as part of the global auction, and probably even more so if that discussed possible Australian window comes into fruition, and there would be a specific amount set aside specifically for Australian projects. But this is, of course, even also on the global auction model, there's an exciting opportunity. Maybe one question for David and Gary, and maybe David, you want to start, was given that you, of course, speak with lots of industry participants regularly in the hydrogen sector. What do you think Australian projects need to move towards making final investment decisions? And so what is H2Global a key instrument that helps them to come to that point of that investment decision? And maybe Gary, from your industry expertise, you might want to add as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Michael. I think there's a few points that industry globally, and specifically also Australian industry, needs. So they need some kind of certainty on price and its development over the next years and decades. And they need some kind of certainty or understanding about the demand, right, globally, but also then again in Europe. And if you're, a big off-taker, then those conversations can be had at a level to off-taker relationship. But if you're an accumulation of smaller demands, then a system like H2Global or HINCO can really support that, because it can aggregate the demand in one market and then have conversations at a larger volume level, which gives you a more concrete idea of how prices or volumes might develop over the next decade. So I think that's where it plays a really crucial role in helping the global market understand where it's going, because certainty really is what is needed to make investment decisions. Just one point, maybe having said that, I mean, in our conversations that we had in Berlin just a few weeks ago at our event at the embassy, there was quite a few Australian project owners that were already saying that, they're so certain about the future of the hydrogen global market that they're really moving ahead with investment decisions, even though they don't really have clear answers to these questions yet. I think we are on the edge of getting those questions. As I said, I think initially from larger off-takers, but hopefully with projects or concepts like H2Global, we will be able to get a better understanding of the overall market and demand in Europe. And that will just accelerate the development. And that's exactly, Gary, maybe this is where you can take over. As you said, the thing we really need is scale now, right? So the more certainty we can have, the faster we can scale.
Yeah, sure. And just echoing some of your points there, I guess the offtake agreements and the cost of the final product is key to the projects moving forward. But I guess on top of that, it's the PPA agreements as well, the land, all these kind of sectors or areas come into play from that side of things. And as a global kind of technology provider and operator of hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen plants, etc., I feel there's a key for not just looking at the CapEx side of things and getting that initial cost down, but it's the life cycle cost of a project and a plant as well. So really, from a German technology point of view, we focus on cost, but we know we're never going to be probably the cheapest in the world. We know that it's all around quality and ensuring that there's the life cycle of a plant. So there may be regions in the world where you can source a lower product, a lower technology, but it's ensuring that that plant is going to run for 20, 25 plus years, and that you're not going to have potential issues with the quality of that technology with your plant and your supply moving forward. On top of that, I think there's other kind of areas that need to be taken into consideration, like the government support, federal and state government. That's been good from an Australian point of view to now, and we need that to continue. Obviously, we've got an election to go through, and hopefully that then gives us another boost moving forward with the current or a new government coming into play, and an additional funding scheme. So there's H2 supply, there's H2Global, there's Highgate, there's a number of different opportunities within the region that we can really work on those, bring them into the project scope, and get these mid to large and mega scale projects off the ground.
Oh, thanks both David and Gary. And of course, we are also watching the questions coming in through the chat, and we'll of course address them first, but also very soon. But first, we also want to go through some questions that were pre-submitted previously. But Fiona, maybe also that it's not just me moderating. Can I quickly hand over to you again?
Thanks, Michael. I might just put people on the spot and make them uncomfortable, but I'll try not to do that. I'm really keen to unpack this idea of certainty and what certainty do people need, and it seems to be such a challenging question to get to the heart of it. It's not necessarily, there isn't a one answer, because obviously there are different risk appetites, different businesses. But I'm interested in hearing from the panel, but also in others, just on the call who are willing to jump on. When we think about the risk appetite, and let's think about the risk appetite of the boards that are signing off on investment decisions, what do they need to see to make an investment? And while there may be standouts, and David, I'm hoping they're not just standouts who are saying we're ready to go, we've got everything we need. Is there a way of characterizing how we even understand the certainty that needs to be reached? Because it's not going to be absolute certainty. Obviously, everyone has to deal with some risk in this environment. How do we understand that? And are people on the call willing to jump in and say, well, actually, we need this level, and it'd be great to know how we get there.
Fiona, maybe just to extend onto your point, I'm really keen to have some visibility on what the debt providers want. What sort of appetite they have for providing capital into these projects, what the cost of that capital is. That's a pretty opaque environment for me at the minute, so I don't know if any of the audience has an answer to what the financing costs look like, but it's yeah, interesting.
And it's risk sharing as well, isn't it? It's like, are there new mechanisms that need to be employed? David, because you can handle it, I am gonna give you a slightly hard time and say, so if we could unpack a bit more of what you're saying before about the readiness. Do you have further thoughts about what those risk appetites of boards might look like and what they're needing to see?
I think it's a really interesting question, and we've discussed this before, Fiona. It's in, like, especially, I guess, if you're in a position like we are at Australian, and we have conversations both with project owners, but also with banks, for example, or debt providers, as James mentioned. You know, the narrative we get a lot is we're all go. So the question really is, where is that, you know, that disconnect in the middle? I think we need to distinguish between the smaller scale projects, the pilot projects, the commercialization trial projects, where everyone's very, I think, comfortable now with taking a lot of risk. At least that's what we see in the market. And then suddenly, and this is to Gary's point, where we actually need to get to, which is the real ramp up, where these hesitations come back into the game. I can't really say specifically, because obviously in terms of the commercial decision making, we don't have in-depth insight into individual of those decisions either. But I do get a sense that the geopolitical drivers that were mentioned earlier and kind of energy security is going to help catalyze this quite a bit in the upcoming months. Yeah, so I'm kind of intrigued to see where the next few months go, because it's a question, as you highlighted, that we also face and that we don't really have an answer to it either. But I can only say, like, if we talk to individuals, they're all saying it's not us. So it is an interesting conundrum.
Well, I'm taking this on as a challenge, a personal challenge. I want to know the answer to this, and we'll be asking that when we're in Rotterdam as well. Timo, I see you've got your hand up. It'd be lovely to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah, maybe because just the questions that you raised, also that James raised, because when we designed H2Global, we had sort of a huge consultation. We had, I think, more than 50, companies and industries along the entire value chain, also the financial industry, so the banks that were on board. And we really tried to figure out, what do you need? At what stage would you start sort of, signing any and providing any debt? And they made it very clear that the market is extremely uncertain in regards to market risk, in regards to pricing risk, and in regards to regulatory risk. And that's sort of a deadly combination that we have. And that is exactly why also the banks, and I always say, listen, it doesn't make sense if we start H2Global and you guys are not happy and wouldn't be able to provide debt on that basis, on these offtake agreements, because that's exactly why we focus on these three elements to take out that risk, at least for a 10-year period. But the banks made it very clear in our consultations that at this point in time, it's very challenging for them to provide any debt on that basis. It's mostly, equity driven, but that just limits then sort of the real scale up that we have. So I think especially the regulatory issue is a big one. I think markets, due to also the catalyzing effect now that we have, diversification, or the pressure that is in there, might be a game changer, but we need regulatory certainty. And that's a big issue here, because you don't start investing now and then in 3 years' time, you might see yourself being with a stranded asset because it's not green anymore, what you're producing here, or whatever standards are not being compiled with. And that's a big issue.
Michael, can I push this a little bit further? And is that okay?
Absolutely, Fiona. I just wanted to make you aware that I think the question that James Timmers put in the chat is also kind of related to this topic about certainty of investment decisions, and might also be relevant. And we might want to ask James maybe to ask his question in person quickly, so that we can involve him and have that aspect also as part of the certainty discussion.
Yeah, thanks. The question was really just around timeframe. So we've got this first round of funding, or these first, auction coming up. What are the sort of timeframes for the first delivery or package of deliveries post-award in that auction? That obviously impacts, how long people have to get their funding then in place and projects off the ground, etc.
Should I answer directly, or?
Yes, please.
Yeah. No, as I mentioned, so it's quite ambitious. The first delivery needs to take place towards the end of 2024. There might be, BMW made it already, there might be a slight chance to shift that maybe for a year or so, but it will be 24, 25 the first dates of delivery, because the 900 million are made available in that time frame between 24 and 33 in the German government budget. So that's quite an ambitious target. So it will be, as I think, David, you mentioned the projects that probably going to win under H2 Global, under that first round, they need to be quite advanced in an advanced stage. But we will ensure that there will be sufficient timing also in regards to secure funding, obviously based on the PPAs or the HPAs, what we call it, the hydrogen purchase agreements that we enter into.
Okay, thanks.
Michael, I was just thinking, we've got the CEFC, the Green Bank in Australia, and then we've got the commercial banks. Maybe there are means by which they can work together, and there's further sharing of risk if there's something similar in Germany as well. That could be the topic for a whole other discussion, and no doubt there are experts who have very good views that we could tap into. But yeah, I'd just like to put out there, we want to know what people's views on these risks are. And we'll come back to that at the end, but we certainly encourage you to get in touch with and when I say we, I mean all of us in the policy side here. But if I say particularly Michael and I, as the hydrogen subgroup chairs, that's what we're here to do. We're here to understand what the needs are in order to sort of help our governments know and work toward policy solutions. So I'll stop there, Michael.
No, wonderful, Fiona, to have that really key point emphasized. So really, we are there to basically collect industry feedback and also to contribute that as part of our role as co-chairs of the Hydrogen Subworking Group to both governments. And of course, we both have a lot of discussions in our everyday life with hydrogen stakeholders, but nevertheless, we absolutely encourage everyone, once you basically identify not just risk, but especially bottlenecks in your hydrogen project development, to let us know what they are. And of course, we are aware of the overall general topics like financing or regulatory environment. But of course, the more specific you can be, the more specific we can work with both governments to find solutions for some of those topics, of course. But nevertheless, one of the points that has been discussed over many years is, of course, the hydrogen supply chain between Australia and Germany. And of course, it's wonderful to see that a few years ago, High Supply has been established. That is, and it's implemented by a great team, and of course here represented today by Jill. Can you tell us maybe a little bit more on your view on the bilateral opportunities arising now and what you have found as part of High Supply that might be relevant in terms of H2 Global as well?
Yes. Yeah, thank you. So I think the slide, which was shown by Francisca on the Hydrogen Cooperation Network, illustrated it quite well, that we have a well-established cooperation between both countries already on the topic of hydrogen, because Germany is probably one of the countries with most government-to-government cooperation on hydrogen, but I think the one with Australia is by far one of the most established ones, and this is really impressive considering that we basically started 2.5 years ago. And also other most recent announcements, such as the MOU by FFI together with Covestro, as well as with E.ON, just illustrate once more how serious the stakeholders are in actually trying to develop the supply chain between both countries. But there are obviously still many barriers to overcome, which have been discussed already. And one is clearly to secure the offtake, where I think H2 Global has a big role to play to secure, at least for some projects, this offtake in order to kickstart the supply chain. But I also see another purpose actually for H2 Global, which has not been emphasized enough yet, I think, is because in High Supply, when we started, we really wanted to try to analyze whether it's technically feasible to produce hydrogen in Australia, then convert it to shippable carrier, put it in the tank, and then ship it to Europe, and we did, and we have the preliminary results that it's feasible. And if you do it with more mature technologies and big ships, it might even be economic viable, also in terms of CO2 emissions actually associated with the shipment from Australia. But we still have very strong advocates in Germany and Europe that are very much focusing on the domestic production within Europe, which is absolutely great. But we really need to convince those people still that supply chains such as the one with Australia are a serious opportunity to secure our energy supply, even more than ever. And I think once H2Global has been established and implemented and successfully auctioned the first round, I think that's a very important signal to not only Australia and Germany, but just general the global hydrogen market. So I think it would be very important to kind of showcase and prove the concept and convincing everyone who doesn't believe in international imports of renewable hydrogen or their derivatives. So the opportunities are there. They are alongside the entire supply chain, starting with production, especially regarding offshore, which has not been explored as much in Australia, but has a massive potential there, which would make a lot of sense to generate renewable electricity offshore and then produce renewable hydrogen very close to the port. So you can very easily convert it there and then put it on a ship to export it. And in order to convert hydrogen, Germany has a lot of knowledge and technology, for example, in converting hydrogen into ammonia, as well as methanol. But also there's a lot of opportunity regarding LOHC. Both countries are very intensely engaging in research and developments on different liquid organic hydrogen carriers. And then for ammonia, which is very important, once it's delivered at a European or German port, we also need to potentially crack it back. And this has also been explored by both sides very intensely. Another opportunity would be to explore the opportunity to direct reduce iron ore, which is not necessarily a carrier for hydrogen, but certainly a product which helps to decarbonize the steel making process in Germany. And those are just a very few ones. Obviously, there are more around distribution and infrastructure. But I think really when it comes to Australia, the difference compared to other countries, that Germany is working on hydrogen, I think the benefit with Australia is very much that we are kind of meeting each other on the same level. So both countries have a lot to bring to the table. And I think this is very important to create win-win situations to have a sustainable and long-term partnership.
Oh, thank you very much, Jill. Indeed, this is really clearly two close partners, like-minded, like Australia and Germany, really have an opportunity really now to establish a long-time sustainable green hydrogen collaboration. And I think clearly, Timo, thanks for explaining the H2Global opportunities in that. Gary, maybe I can come back to you, because Jill, of course, also talked about, of course, those exciting opportunities in terms of technology, but also touched on the point that German technology, of course, can play a key role for Australian projects as well. And I wanted to hear maybe your view also in light of the fact that, of course, with the physical distance from Germany, we are very much aware here that in Australia, of course, it's not just German technology that is being considered for the project, but also technology coming out of other countries like the US or Japan or others. And where do you see the standing of German technology within the hydrogen establishing supply chain, and given particularly that I think this is a wonderful two-way opportunity. Of course, if German technology gets utilized in Australian projects, and then Australia helps with the energy needs and energy transition requirements over in Germany through green hydrogen.
Yeah, I think from looking just on the German side of technology supplying into Australia, I think there's Linde, of course, and there's other German technologies as well that we're in competition with. But I think in that hydrogen ammonia market, we stand above other countries and regions with a lot of wealth of experience supplying into that market. We've been supplying from a Linde point of view. We're a 140-year-old company working in the hydrogen space for over 60 years. It's not new to us. It's not new to other German technologies either. And I think that it definitely stands us in a good position moving forward to supply to Australia, and then obviously with that product then being shipped into Asia Pacific, into Europe and elsewhere. Yet there obviously are other regions. There's a lot of other technologies that will be lower cost, and looking at that, and I touched on that earlier, that we probably will be focusing on life cycle costs of the project, not just that CapEx side of things. And obviously the quality of product as well is key to us. We see that there's various different aspects to it. It's our in-house technology really sets us apart as well, as far as we go from a power coming into our plant, whether it's a renewable power or a natural gas or whatever coming in, and everything from air separation units, ammonia loops, hydrogen electrolysis, liquefaction, hydrogen refueling systems, and then that compression and storage. And it's also the ramp up and ramp down of those, because we have renewable energy coming in. We need to also look at ensuring that the plants can either go into a kind of quiet mode, steady mode, whilst they're waiting for power to come in, ramp up and ramp down to very efficiently and fast as well. So that's all technology that's up and ready and available now. It's really looking at all the areas where we can support the market, and that starts from mobility, domestic mobility, all the way up to large scale export of the green ammonia and hydrogen and methanol.
Oh, thank you so much, Gary. And indeed, 60 years of experience in hydrogen projects, of course, is a great, for example for Linde. And of course, we have other German technology providers as well with really extensive experience that is relevant for the scale up of the hydrogen economy. And of course, not to forget, we really have German companies that can not just provide the technology solutions, but everything, including finance, insurance, and certification and other aspects. But maybe Timo, thank you for staying on. If I can maybe ask one question to you, just also in regards to the technology that we are, everyone here is really clear. You pointed it out earlier. It is correct that for H2Global, of course, you would not really look at if possible German technology involvement in the project as a criteria, but it would really be a basically reverse auction model that focuses purely on the most competitive offer, initially at least.
Exactly. From a state aid point of view, it was made very clear also by the Commission during the notification process between the German government and the EU Commission, that it cannot be sort of limited to German technology only. It's open. But yeah, as I said, the government believes that German technology providers are well positioned to play a vital role here. So let's see.
Yeah, no, I can definitely confirm from many industry discussions that German technology providers not just have an excellent reputation in the Australian market, but can really offer very tailored and competitive solutions for Australian projects. One aspect we haven't really touched on at all, and maybe Jill, you can say something further about that, is that of course we not just have the collaboration on the company and industry side between Australia and Germany, but also on the research side, and they are supporting the hydrogen developments and the scale up of a hydrogen economy. And I know that they are also a key part of high supply. Maybe you can say a little bit about your experience and also in terms of the research collaboration between those countries.
Yeah, thank you. So basically, many of those opportunities that I just mentioned can also only be solved together with the input from science, because some technologies are quite mature, such as the production of ammonia, but others, such as LOHC, the technology readiness level is, depending on the carrier, is not necessarily as high. So there is still a need for innovation and research for all the transport options, actually. And I think what is very special about high supply and also within both countries is actually that both pursuing collaboration between industry and academia in many areas. And I think you can only do that with such project as high supplies, but there are many other examples as well to do that. But it's necessary to come, especially from a very low technology readiness level, into the more mature ones to commercially distribute the technologies. And there are many research corporations in the pipeline, but they have already been part in those supply chain considerations.
Oh, thank you so much, Jill. I think definitely the topic, not just around bilateral hydrogen collaboration, but specifically what H2Global can offers, we could extend much further. But of course, we, in the interest of time, we said we limit everyone's involvement today until past, and we are already very, very close. So let me thank again our panelists, of course, Jill, Gary, and David, for their insights, and of course also Timo very much for staying on and providing additional expertise and feedback from H2Global. That is greatly appreciated. Thanks for sharing your insights with our audience today. And clearly, from my personal perspective, I see H2Global as probably within the framework of bilateral funding opportunities, probably as the single most exciting one, and definitely one that will play a key role in the scale up and really the breakthrough of larger scale green hydrogen projects that are really export oriented towards Europe and Germany. Of course, what we really, Fiona and I, want to encourage everyone from today's discussion is really to think about, based on the information presented and the questions answered, if H2Global is relevant for you, and follow those developments and really be part of the consultation process and really keep it on the radar for your project development. Fiona and myself, as mentioned earlier, would definitely love to hear from industry participants around how your project is going, where specifically you see bottlenecks, so that we can provide it to the hydrogen sub-working group and really help, therefore, to further deepen the already very close bilateral hydrogen collaboration. And let me finally throw it over to Fiona, my wonderful co-chair, not just here in the session, but of course also on the hydrogen sub-working group. Over to you, Fiona, please.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, everyone. I won't keep everyone. I think it's been a really interesting session. So thanks, everyone. Thanks to our speakers again, as Michael said, and all of you participating. Please do get in contact. Get in contact with us, with AHK. Get in contact with Austrade. You've heard from David there as well. And for those of you who are going to be in Rotterdam in just over a week's time, get in touch. I know I'm going to be there. We have an Australian delegation there. It would be fantastic to, if you're in Germany, if you're in the EU and you'd like to set up appointments, get in touch because we can all help sort that out for you. And then there's also Adelaide. So we've got our conference at the end of May. So there's a few opportunities for us to see each other face to face, in person, which would be such a pleasure. But anyway, thank you so much. And I think we can close everything there.
Yeah.
I might just quickly ask about the recording. Is that going to be made available in a way that we can tell people?
Yes, indeed. We will share it with the participants. And indeed, I can also just emphasize what you said, Fiona. Absolutely hope to see everyone, especially also in Adelaide, where we will have a German delegation. The Australian Hydrogen Conference is indeed a key opportunity, and there will be also a bilateral reception. Franziska kindly put her email address in the chat. Please get in touch if you have further questions or follow-up. We work extremely closely with her and we'll coordinate our responses with you. Thank you, everyone, and hopefully see you soon in person. And thank you for your interest again. Bye-bye.
And thank you, Franziska.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.